Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
I don't even know how to start this episode. I thought I had something, but we've just been sitting here refreshing feeds, talking to people, and every 2 seconds there's brand new news. Folks, this is a public service announcement. The information in this podcast and anywhere in the hockey world is only good for like 3 seconds at a time. It can expire at any moment. So listen to this as soon as humanly possible. This is the single most insane day, not even just for the Detroit Red Wings, but across the NHL trade deadline since we started this podcast. Knowing, in over 600 episodes and over 8 years of doing this show, it's bizarre to be able to look at, get ready for today's episode and say this is guaranteed to be the single biggest episode we've ever done. And we know for a fact that there's going to be major news dropping sometime soon after we hit publish.
Remember on Sunday when we said we expect a quiet week from the Red Wings?
Oh,
whoops.
We talked about whiplash at the start of the other episode. It's still happening.
The only thing that at least saved me personally from looking even dumber than I usually already do is I said if they collect 0 points out of a possible 4 from Ottawa, it completely changes everything. That one little throwaway line. Well, boy, did that carry more weight than I wanted it to.
There's 2 catalysts, and we're going to get to them at some point this episode. The Tanner Jeannot trade, I think, changed things not just across the NHL, but specifically for Steve Yzerman. And like you said, Brad, they lost against Tampa, and then they had 2 crucial games against a wild card opponent that they could have knocked out of the race. And not only did they lose both in regulation, they got absolutely bullied, dummied out there on the ice. And it was, frankly, it was a statement from Ottawa, and it was a big statement in a negative way for Detroit. No doubt that Yzerman was looking at that game and made some decisions, which
set things in motion for Ottawa as well.
Yeah.
Those 2 games changed the balance of the Atlantic Division in at least more than a fraction of a way.
Of the Atlantic Division, of the Red Wings rebuild, of what the next year or 2 might look like. Regardless, folks, as you can see, we are overwhelmed by how much we have to talk to you about, so we're just going to get this started. Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and all of the insane trade deadline dealings happening right now. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. If you are a returning listener, enjoy. I'm sure this is going to be a memorable one for you. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, I want to disclaim we are recording right now as I speak. It is 7:09 p.m. Eastern. So this is the information we have right now. Dylan Larkin has re-signed, has signed his extension in Detroit. That national nightmare is over. The captain is staying in Hockeytown for 8 years. We're going to talk about that. Jake Walman, who his contract would be the headline of any other episode by its own right, has extended in Detroit for 3 years. So Texas Roadhouse is cheering, as well as Jake Walman fans everywhere, as well as Moritz Seider, his top pairing line mate. That's small news. Filip Hronek was traded in a shock to most people to Vancouver for a massive return, especially relative to what Jakob Chychrun got traded for not long afterwards. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the catalyst that set things in motion for Steve Yzerman to move in a direction where he was going to make deals. We'll talk about the players on the trading block for Detroit. Tyler Bertuzzi's name is back out there. Filip Zadina's name is out there. There are going to be many other names who are options for Detroit to move. We'll talk about what is next for the trade deadline over these next couple of days, what this means for Detroit's future, the Atlantic Division. Is this a reset? Do they go after a Colton Parayko? What could possibly be happening next? And then we are going to try to cover whatever we can across the NHL.
Yes, every player in the league was traded over the last 5 days.
It honestly feels like it. Evan, actually, you've been traded to the Steve Dangle podcast and back since we started this episode, so welcome back.
Wow.
Yeah, we had to spend a first-round pick to get you back.
They must have had some salary retained then.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
It's lucky for you.
Brad, the 30 minutes Brad and I had to do without you at the end of the last episode was really tough, so we weren't a big fan of that.
Really enjoyed Jesse's company, though.
It was actually funny. You know who broke the Steve Dangle or
the Steve Dangle trade?
You know who broke the Filip Hronek trade to us was Steve Dangle. he texted us, and I was outside shoveling,
I was at work.
and he said, WTF, and I just sent some question marks back because that was the first thing I saw on my phone. And then I had messages from a few other people, and then I saw Twitter. I was like, I looked away from my phone for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I saw on my, on your lock screen when your face opens it, I'm like, WTF. Immediately, first thought, uh-oh.
Yeah.
I thought Bertuzzi was traded to Toronto or something, and somehow I was more surprised when he actually said what it was.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very quickly before we jump into the content here, folks, if you want to support the Winged Wheel podcast, patreon.com/Winged Wheel podcast is one of the ways to do it. Our patrons are the heart and soul of the show, and they're the reason why we're able to have, an emergency episode when we need to, a massive episode tonight, a trade deadline review episode, which will be coming Friday night as well. So there's going to be a lot of content this week. All of that happens because of our Patreon. They get access to our Winged Wheel podcast Discord. They get entered into all of our giveaways. We're giving away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game this season. The majority of them going to patrons. In addition to that, they also get access to our Patreon exclusive bonus episodes which record right after these ones, where we answer any questions and comments that didn't make the main show, let loose, have fun, and just generally have a good time. So patreon.com/Winged Wheel podcast if you want to support the show. All right. Also, for those watching, this is going to be a very heavy check the notifications episode, so bear with us on that one. Let's start with the big news today, presuming that something didn't break already.
I mean, a trade did just break, but it's not relevant to the Red Wings.
Dylan Larkin, the captain in Hockeytown, re-signs. It is finally over. Steve Yzerman gets it done before the trade deadline passes. It all happened very quickly in terms of things being reported as moving closer. We got word that things had kind of nudged in a direction, looking towards some finality here, and it ended up in this Wednesday afternoon, a 8-year, $8.7 million per year contract for Dylan Larkin. So he comes in under $9 million, a little bit above the Bo Horvat number, $8.7 million per year. Some details: no signing bonuses. Most of the base salary is front loaded. The first 3 years of the contract are $10, $11, and $10 million respectively. A full no trade clause for the first 5 years, and the last 3 years is a limited no trade clause wherein Dylan Larkin has to give a 10-team trade list. So 10 teams he'd be comfortable being traded to. So 8 times 8.7 is that number, about the range that everyone was really expecting it to come in. Initial thoughts and reactions.
I think the first reaction from everybody was relief. I mean, what else could it be after this storyline persisting for over a year now? Because everybody saw the end of the contract coming. Just wanted on record, we were talking about it before when we months ago made our predictions on this contract. I was $10,000 off what it ended up being because I predicted 8.71. But it's good. Now, my initial thought was immediately rendered useless like 2 hours later, but my thought was, this is good. The Red Wings can keep the foot on the gas in terms of the rebuild. They're coming out of it. They're expecting to be good. We've talked at length. You cannot lose Dylan Larkin for nothing. And he had the no-move clause, so if he didn't sign, you were losing Dylan Larkin for nothing. That's the reality of it. You can't go out and acquire everybody they acquired and, take yourself out of the Bedard sweepstakes and expect to be a team competing regularly for the playoffs now without Dylan Larkin. So that much was clear. They had to keep him. So hence the relief part of the reaction. Now, in terms of what the actual contract is relative to the player, I think it's fair. I don't think one side, quote unquote, won this contract, which generally means it's fair. We've seen how crazy the market is for centers in terms of trade value, in terms of contract value. To get a premium top-end center is extremely difficult, and teams trip over themselves to do it. The Red Wings didn't get him at a steal, but they didn't have to overpay to keep him. Does he have the offensive production of a guy who's going to be making 8.7? Yes or no, I could see the argument on that either way. But because he's such a well-rounded 200-foot player who literally impacts every aspect of the game in a positive way, it makes it very fair to me. Again, we've had talks, can the Red Wings win a Stanley Cup with Dylan Larkin as their number one center? And the answer was and probably still is no unless you have two Dylan Larkins. So if Marco Kasper turns into a Dylan Larkin, okay. Again, temper expectations. I'm just using Kasper as an example here. That could be possible. But all in all, it resolves what was the Red Wings' biggest current problem. It helps keep the direction of the team going in the direction they want it to go. And let's be honest, he's the captain. He's the heart and soul of the team. Like, from a hockey fan standpoint, and after the two games they just had, Red Wings fans needed reason to keep believing. And this is about as big of a sign as we could have got to keep believing.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple things in there, Brad, that I think are really stand out for me. One, there was no other option here for the Red Wings. Whether you are on either extreme, so buy now, load up, get into the playoffs because you think the Red Wings need it. You miss playoffs in Hockey Town and you're tired of losing, which is up until the Ottawa games, I think what a lot of people were in that camp. Or if you are, no, the Red Wings are not ready. Look how insanely loaded the Atlantic is. You need to reset the rebuild back, multiple years, if not several. Or if you come down the middle, I don't see a version of the Red Wings that could do without Dylan Larkin. Is he on the ideal timeline if you're setting the rebuild back? No, but he's also not old. Like, he still is playing prime years hockey. He's 26. He'll be 27 over the summer. He has a lot of really good top-end years left in him, and he is the Detroit's only number one center. Like you said, Brad, that's their only option. Dylan Larkin held all the leverage in this situation other than Yzerman's. F you, I'm Steve Yzerman. You get the number you get. And it seems like they came in about it. This is a market deal. You're right. No one fleeced each other. Larkin didn't get what Barzal got. He didn't get much more than Bo Horvat got. I do feel like he flexes muscles by holding out this long and, getting 8.7. You're right. By production, I think it's a little bit higher than if you're trying to boil things down to complete objectivity, but the market is what the market is. The cap is going up, so whatever, if you consider this an overpay, I think whatever margins those are might be erased by the cap increasing soon enough. And Yzerman didn't, break the bank to lock in a necessary asset who had a lot of leverage over him. I'm not going to sit here and say this is Yzerman's greatest contract and what an absolute steal for Detroit. No, it was a necessary piece of business. Do I think Larkin took a hometown discount? No, I don't think so. But he also didn't really get overpaid in any appreciable way. This is down the middle for me. And reaction, grateful it's done. Grateful that the Red Wings' future is secured down the middle. They have a lot of work to do, but again, it was necessary, and this is a good thing for Red Wings fans.
I think the overall contract, in terms of, obviously we knew it would be 8 years, and the dollar amount I thought was, right where I thought both sides would land. And like you guys mentioned, you can't lose Dylan Larkin for nothing. He has all the skills, all the intangibles that they need from their captain. And I think it helps sort of start to set the foundation for future contracts for guys like Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider. Like, everybody always says, like, oh, when they look at other teams, it's like, oh, well, this guy makes this much, so why would we pay an X, Y, and Z player more? Kind of starts to toe the line a little bit. So the fact that Steve Yzerman did not have to overpay for Dylan Larkin, I think is a huge asset there as well.
It does also alleviate a lot of concern, because had they gone past the trade deadline, and for context here, Larkin did have a no trade clause even on the last year of this contract. So had they gone past the trade deadline without moving him and without a contract in place, and, Yzerman presumably moving towards shipping out multiple pieces on Detroit, Hronek's already gone, Larkin's had seen a lot of friends traded away. Bertuzzi might be the next of them. I'm sure, losing Hronek isn't easy to watch on a team that you're a captain of. Getting this secured now it just removes that extra little bit of anxiety that might have come with, we're doing all of this and Dylan Larkin's not signed, and what if he watches what Detroit's doing and says, I want to win now, and he goes. So that it's good that that's not a storyline that has to be explored at all.
Yeah, and as we'll get into later, the Red Wings are going to need a veteran leader for a while.
Yeah.
And your 27-year-old captain is probably the guy you want to be leading that group. So that, the intangible stuff, again, we've talked about how overrated or underrated it is in certain circumstances, but I think it's very necessary for this team and where they're heading, especially with today's events. And also it's worth noting that Yzerman didn't get a contract that is unmovable if things go completely south. Larkin's got the no move for the no trade clause for the first 5 years. But the last 3 years, presumably when Larkin's going to start hitting his decline, because he'll be, 32, 33, 34 years old there, he can be traded, and there's no signing bonuses. So if it really goes sideways, however unlikely, a buyout will be very doable. So it's an expensive contract. It's a fair contract, but it's not a contract that is going to be following this team around like a boat anchor if it goes south towards the back half of it.
I believe the most comparable contracts as listed by Cap Friendly, and by the way, Cap Friendly, they always deserve a lot of recognition, but especially this time of year, thank them and sites like Puckpedia for what they do. Cap Friendly listed some comparable contracts for Dylan Larkin. So Bo Horvat obviously just got 8 times 8.5 from the Islanders. Tomas Hertl 8 times 8.128, and Mika Zibanejad 8 times 8.5. A couple people pointed out they're like the Zibanejad one, that was a big discount, and Yzerman didn't take that. And it's like, yeah, that was what was called out the moment Zibanejad signed that. And that to me, it might seem a little pessimistic, but that's where you can draw the comparison and say, yeah, no, there wasn't really a hometown discount here. Like Larkin is really going to have to play and earn this contract. That said, he's been playing lights out for really his whole time in Detroit, but he had a small sophomore slump and has just been better and better.
Yep.
He's been probably Detroit's MVP this season. The only person who could maybe shake that up a bit is Ville Husso, but Larkin's been consistent all year, especially. There's no future of the Red Wings as they're built right now without keeping Larkin long term. And it was a deal that whenever we talk to people about it who are in the know, they said it's going to get done. Larkin wants to be here. He wants to be a Red Wing. It's his hometown team. As much as he brought in, the big hitter in agency to squeeze every dollar he could out of it, and as much as he waited out, made Red Wings fans nervous for a long time, it was always going to get done. So Larkin got his payday, biggest payday of his career. Good for him. And Yzerman was able to keep him, give Larkin that, and still not hamper Detroit moving forward. Because let's take a quick look at Detroit's cap structure. They have some big contracts coming up, and depending on what they do with the trade deadline, they might have a variable amount of cap space, but no matter which way you shake it, Seider and Raymond's contracts are coming up. And is he going to go with the strategy of what you set Larkin at is what other players are going to be capped at? I don't know, but it certainly gives him the leverage to do that too.
Yeah, and flexibility is everything in today's NHL. Look at all the gymnastics a lot of the contenders are doing right now to clear up cap space in order to get what they need to, make their runs. So, it is what it is. Coincidentally, Tampa just moved out just enough cap space for half of Tyler Bertuzzi's contract. Anyways, I digress.
So Larkin, they locked up their number one center spot. You alluded to this, Brad. One of Detroit's biggest needs is still a number one or number two center. That doesn't change things.
We'll call it a 1B center.
Yeah, a top six center, a bona fide top six center who on their night could play the first line.
Yeah, an above average second line center at a minimum.
They also, their whole outright D gets a little bit bigger with Hronek being moved out, and they still need the elite scoring. But regardless, that's what the Red Wings are looking at in terms of cap structure. That's what they have in Dylan Larkin. So that's Larkin. And just as this isn't talked about enough, but I think it's important to kind of call out these things, especially as the cap moves. At the time of signing, Larkin's cap hit is 10.55% of the cap. So that'll adjust. The contract kicks in next year. So whatever next year's cap is will make that fluctuate a little bit. It'll go down. But as of right now, 10.55% of the cap, just if you're drawing some comparisons. That's Dylan Larkin. Let's talk about the other big signing, which on its own day, like I said, would have been headline news. Jake Walman, a banner left defenseman for the Detroit Red Wings, one of the most surprisingly positive turnarounds in terms of a project player acquired in a trade, was extended for 3 years at $3.4 million per year by Steve Yzerman and the Detroit Red Wings. Jake Walman is here to stay and enjoy his Texas Roadhouse before games. This is, I'm going to speak for you both here, news that makes all of us happy that Walman is staying. Something that's kind of been teased at for a while, but we weren't sure approaching the deadline if Walman was going to be there, if they thought the left side of defense would have been too crowded. Your thoughts and reactions on them locking down Mo Seider's defense partner?
Great value. When we had a conversation a couple months ago about a Walman extension, we talked about opportunity for value, because there's a lot of things that will get you a quote-unquote discount on a player, whether that be injury history, inexperience, etc. And we said with Walman, it was inexperience. We can see as he's playing right now how good he is, but he does not have a long track record of playing like this. So he's not going to get, like, if Jake Walman had 3 years of this type of level of play under his belt, what's he getting? 6, 7, 8 mil?
Oh, his contract would have been doubled.
Exactly. So you're taking the risk that this isn't an aberration, that this isn't a flash in the pan, and giving him a moderate term with a half decent cap hit to kind of hedge your risk. Well, if Jake Walman continues to play as he is now for the next 3 years with no improvement, it's a phenomenal deal. You're getting a top pairing defenseman for under
3.4.
Yeah, 3.4. So under $4 million a year. Phenomenal. Absolute phenomenal. Now, given what they did today, the term presents some question marks.
I have some information on that, but yeah.
Which we'll get to in terms when we talk about the Hronek trade. But either way, good value is good value. Short term provides flexibility. If the Red Wings progress the way the Red Wings want to progress, this will be a tremendous value contract that allows the team room to load up for playoff runs. Hopefully plural. If not, it's a fantastic value contract that will be traded for an absolute king's ransom. So there's no lose on this contract, no matter what the trajectory is of the Red Wings over the next 3 years.
And it can be really hard to find a D partner that plays well with your best defenseman. Like we saw with Ben Sherratt and Mo Seider, didn't really work out. Then they bring Walman into play with Seider, and it's like a total revelation. So locking in a guy like Jake Walman who can play alongside Moritz Seider, especially at a great contract, is a huge win for the organization.
Absolutely. He unlocked him. And that really kind of affirmed the kind of things that we were seeing at the start of the season. Like, yes, Ben Sherratt's play style didn't lend well to Mo Seider being able to play his kind of game, but Mo Seider also has a lot of growing to do in terms of maturity as a player to be adaptable, and he just didn't have that yet. I think they were hoping he might be able to do it, and it's not a knock on him. He's still so young, but they thought they gave it enough run before they realized it wasn't working. So, yeah, Walman did do that. So just to give some details on the numbers and the term, first of all, I know a lot of people wanted longer than 3 years, and I think you can count Steve Yzerman and the Red Wings among them. This is Jake Walman setting himself up to, at age 28 or 29, being able to get himself another contract. He knows, like right now, 41 games, 5 goals, 5 assists for 10 points. He's not putting up first pairing defenseman numbers, especially in the modern NHL. So that is why the number is small. Like Steve Yzerman, you know the way he operates. He just squeezed the hell out of Dylan Larkin. With Jake Walman, there's no way he was going to pay him. Maybe what his impacts on the ice would dictate, depending on what model you look at, which are like you said, Brad. Some say 6, some say 9 million. Like he's an incredibly impactful player in terms of what happens on the ice when he's on it. But in terms of actual production, 3.4 matches up with what he's put out there. Jake Walman knows he is emerging still. He knows there's more to his game, so he didn't want to lock himself in any longer than 3 years. I'm sure that's probably why it took so long. That the term was the big part of it. If you're Jake Walman, you're saying, well, I'm not going to command $6 or $7 million now. I just don't have the output for it. And I don't have, like you said, Brad, the longevity and the consistency. He was buried behind a very strong St. Louis lineup that won the cup. and he was injured. So his coming out party is happening just now for a reason. So he needs time to build that up. So for him, 3 years at $3.4 million, yes, it's not the AAV that he'd maybe want, but it's the term that sets him up to be able to do that. I agree with everything you both said. Like, so important. Like, this is huge for Mo Seider. This is huge for Detroit's blue line. At least for the foreseeable future. At the very worst, you don't have to worry about your top pairing defenseman. Let's say Edvinsson comes up or Johansson comes up and they are just lights out and they challenge Jake Walman for that top pairing spot because they're also good with Seider.
It's a good problem to have.
Phenomenal problem to have. But the more likely outcome is they come up and they need time to adjust to the NHL. Well, you don't have to worry about it because Walman Seider is a provably good pairing. It has demonstrated that they can be impactful on the ice. Also, hate to knock on I'm not saying this to knock on Chiarot, but for as much as you might not like Ben Chiarot's contract, I find more value in like the positive. Like, this is a great value for Detroit on Walman's contract. It really makes that pill easier to swallow to know that they have such fantastic value and someone who they're legitimately playing on the top pair for the next 3 years. Under $3.5 million, that's a steal for Detroit. We're talking about 2 steals for Detroit this episode, the Hronek trade and the Walman signing, and I think they're both fantastic steals by Steve Yzerman.
Whoa, spoilers.
Gotta quickly refresh Twitter.
Yeah.
I know. Unironically, there have been 2 more trades in the NHL since we have started recording already.
Are you serious? It's already gone up to 2?
Nemesnikov to San Jose, Teddy Bluger to Vegas.
Oh, okay.
So, not super impactful trades, although one might be for the Red Wings.
That's right. So that's Jake Walman. And Brad, the one point you made about, potentially trading him down the line. If, let's say the price is too high in a few years and you don't want him, that's a tradable contract too. People are also going to be calling about that contract every year. So he has a limited no move. It's a 10-team no trade list, but that leaves a lot of options open. It is a full flexibility, big impact signing. The only drawback, if you're a Red Wings fan and you only care about the team's cap structure, which is I think most Red Wings fans, is it's just not for longer. But love that deal for the Red Wings and Yzerman, and honestly, good on Jake Walman. He's betting on himself. So
yeah, and if Walman doesn't want to stick around at the end of the 3 years and the Red Wings are in their contention window, well, as Arizona just proved, you can get elite defensemen cheap in trade. So
I still can't believe that Chychrun deal compared to Hronek. Okay, let's get into the trade world, and this is where it gets risky.
It gets weird.
Yeah, it gets absolutely
about to get weird.
This is like Doctor Strange observing multiverse of madness kind of all over the place.
Yeah, it's how do we go from Sunday night, we're expecting the Red Wings to compete for a playoff spot, which was 3 days ago. We expect a quiet week. Everything goes wrong for the Red Wings for 3 days. Filip Hronek's a Vancouver Canuck.
And they now have a 3% chance, I think someone tweeted out at Connor Bedard right now. So let's back up a little bit. How did we get to Filip Hronek being traded? We are not going to spend a lot of time on this because we don't have the time today. We'll revisit in the future. But remember how the Red Wings were firmly in the playoff race, but the other teams around them there were a lot of teams in the mix and they were doing really well, and the Red Wings needed to keep pace. Well, they had a back-to-back against Ottawa, where Ottawa was 4 points back of them with the same amount of games played. So they had a chance to essentially deliver a killing blow to an Ottawa team that was, they've been through it this year. They've been playing well, but they have been through it. Ottawa won 6-2 and 6-1 respectively, and it's not just the scores, and it's not just that they won back-to-back. They could have won 2-1 and 3-2 in regulation those games, and this would be a different story. It's how they won. They completely dominated the Red Wings. Was refereeing bad? If this was a different episode, we would talk about some of the most bizarre calls, non-calls, officiating, the offsetting minors, whatever, all of that. But it's not a different episode, so put that to the side for now. Yes, the reffing was bad.
Listen, take any clip of us talking about the reffing, any episode before this season, and just apply it here with maybe a slight premium.
This one was special. But Ottawa came out and dominated Detroit physically. They exposed them defensively. They played a playoff-style game that Detroit completely didn't show up for the first night, and the second night was a carbon copy. And that was I had big, Yzerman was up in the press box. I think it was at Arizona when Arizona trounced Detroit a little while back.
Last season, yeah.
I had the exact same vibes with Yzerman watching. Like those were statement games as to can these teams really make a run for the playoffs and do something there. Surprisingly enough, I wouldn't have bet on this. Ottawa said yes, absolutely, and Detroit was, I hate to be dramatic, they were put in their place. Detroit was exposed as this team is not ready. Is the math over for them to make the playoffs? No, it's not, but it's more how they lost that kind of made this statement. And so we were all saying, okay, this probably maybe definitely moves the needle towards trades happening once again, because Yzerman, pulled Bertuzzi off the market, but by then the Tanner Jeannot trade, which we'll tell you about in a little bit, happened. And so the Tyler Bertuzzi talks had started back up, and Filip Zadina's name was floating out there. So we were all saying, all that, the market running hot, the returns being high, combine that with how Detroit just lost the two most critical games of the season, we might see some pieces unloaded at the deadline.
I'm not going to get into the details of the game, but I will bring up my two concerns from those games. Just the things the Red Wings got exposed on. One, speed. The Red Wings are a very slow team, and Ottawa exposed that dramatically. They were a much faster team, skating and by pace, and it showed, and that is a flaw the Red Wings have to address. Two, and the bigger concern, the Senators exposed the Red Wings mentally.
Yeah.
I was planning on sitting here and talking for 35 minutes about the punk test and how badly the Red Wings lost it in these two games. Because, we can isolate Brady Tkachuk, but it was really the whole team. You have two ways to approach a team like the Senators. Ignore their bullshit entirely. 100% do not get involved. Or you answer the bell from the first time it's rung. The Red Wings had that big loser mentality of we are not indulging in your garbage until we're down by 5 goals. And then you can't do that. It's either from not at all, like, hey, your crap doesn't faze us at all, or, okay, we're willing combatants from the first minute of the game. And the Red Wings didn't do either.
I was really surprised because I felt Derek Lalonde has really excelled this year in refocusing the team. I understand losing Michael Rasmussen really shook up not just their forward lines, but the identity of those forward lines. Dylan Larkin talked about the role Michael Rasmussen played, and that was on display. In all, we could go on for a long time about the concerns. Even if Detroit was up by like 8 points on Ottawa, and this just made the math harder for them, but they are still a playoff favorite of all the wildcard teams, there would still be a lot of real concern coming from those two games. I don't think folks who watched those games and said, no, this team's not ready, I don't think they're being dramatic. It's a visceral reaction, like it's a very emotional reaction, but those two games were big statement games, and both teams came into those games knowing they were playoff level, importance. Ottawa showed up, Detroit didn't.
I just want to make the point, because I saw this point a lot on Twitter. Acquiring fighters is not the answer for what happened there.
Every time these types of games happen, people are like, where's Ryan Reeves? Where's Jordan Tutu? Like, you need to relax.
Were there any actual real fights in these games? No.
Bertuzzi threw some.
Yeah, with Zub, but that wasn't the answer. That wasn't what was going to fix it.
I'm just happy he didn't break his hands.
Yeah, honestly. When he took that shot in game one,
I
almost... Anyways, Tyler, get the hell out of the way. Anyways, fights wouldn't have this. Guys are going to take runs at Larkins. They're going to take the runs at the Bertuzzis. They're going to take runs at the Raymonds and the Seiders. And these guys have to either defend themselves or ignore it. There is no right or wrong answer to which path is the right one to take. You watch superstars like Patrice Bergeron, who never engages in this crap his whole career. You don't have to engage in it as long as you don't let it affect your game and you don't partake. Or, okay, if you're going to step up, you have to step up the very first time it's presented and not back down. Ryan Reeves stepping out there is going to do nothing, because you think Brady Tkachuk's going to go, okay, I'm going to fight your fourth liner who's going to play 6 minutes tonight. No, of course he's not. He's going to be on the ice with Dylan Larkin, and if you acquire a fighter who can't play and you put him on the ice with Brady Tkachuk, guess what? You're probably getting scored on. So
the Red Wings did that anyway.
I know. Yeah, I know. But what I have to laugh about, think back to Sunday, what our episode was, coming off a big win against Washington, a bigger win against the Rangers, and although it was a loss, running Tampa's show. if you just said, okay, here's what's going to happen on Sunday. You have 2 games against Ottawa. Anyways, here's what Wednesday's episode is. What would you imagine had to have happened in those 2 games for that rapid of a change of course?
Like I said, I think I said this maybe 2 or 3 episodes. I've never been more confused by the Red Wings than I am right now. This might be me turning around to being less confused.
Yeah. Oh, because we're going to get into it. You might end up being the most right with your predictions that we've been making fun of all year.
You guys can say whatever you want, give any analysis, any sort of advanced analytics. I just sense the cosmic vibes. And
yeah, Lobsterdamus is plugged in. Why do we even bother?
I don't know.
Okay, so this all feeds into, like we said, this is a statement in terms of are the Red Wings prepared for the playoffs, and the deadline being Friday, March 3rd is a big, benchmark. It's a line that you can't go back once you cross it, that Yzerman had to make some decisions before that. Watching those 2 games, those decisions were obviously made to at least some degree. Today, after the Walman news, after the Larkin news, which the Larkin news dropped today, it was announced that Filip Hronek, who is having a career year in Detroit, was traded to the Vancouver Canucks alongside a 2023 4th-round pick from Detroit in exchange for the New York Islanders' first-round pick in 2023, which came in the Horvat trade. That's top 12 protected. It slides to 2024 unprotected, that first round, in case it does have to slide, and a 2023 second-round pick, which belongs to Vancouver. Some thoughts on this initially. Detroit has tried to sell Filip Hronek in the past. He has 1 year left on a really good contract. It's $4.4 million for 1 year after this one. He is an RFA upon expiry, so he's a very valuable player to have. But before the season, he's not been playing like this forever. Yes, he was still about a half point per game right shot defenseman. So as much as Red Wings fans, including us, watch him every game and needle and zero in on the defensive woes, he was still a very valuable player at his lowest. But Detroit has shopped him in the past. Right? Last season, it was Pittsburgh that they were in conversations with, where Pittsburgh was really in on Hronek and or Bertuzzi, but they only wanted to make hockey trades. Yzerman only wanted draft assets at that point. Nothing happened. This year, someone's offering a first-round pick that is either top 12 protected this year, which, pick 13 in this draft is a phenomenal pick. It's such a strong first round. Or 2024 first could be Celebrini, and that belongs to the Islanders, remember. Plus a second, and you gave up Hronek and a 4th. That's a big return for Yzerman. We'll talk about what it means for the rebuild in general in a little bit, but this trade return specifically, in my mind, that's a haul for Yzerman. I don't really understand it from Vancouver's perspective. This is a steal for me.
From a value perspective, which is what we're talking about at this moment, yeah, this is an incredible haul for the Red Wings. A year ago, if you had told me the Red Wings got a first-round pick for Filip Hronek, I would have been surprised, not shocked, but surprised, but I would have assumed it would have been like Boston's first-round pick 29. Pick 30, pick 31. You know what I mean? Not a middle to top 10 first round pick.
With a second round pick, that's kind of a first round pick in hiding.
Yeah, which is an actual closer pick to a late first round pick than the first round pick the Red Wings did get.
Yes.
Because right now, Vancouver's pick is going to be somewhere between, let's say, conservatively, pick 35 and 40. In a deep draft, that's close to a late first. Because again, I know I've said we've talked about this before, but we've talked about this before. There is a massive difference in value from a mid first round pick to a late first round pick. The gap between pick, let's say 15, which is I think where the Islanders are sitting right now, and pick 30 is gigantic. So it cannot be understated that not only did the Red Wings get a first and a second round pick for Filip Hronek, they got a mid-first and an early second. That is tremendous value. Again, Filip Hronek this year especially is a phenomenal defenseman. What this tells me is the Red Wings think this might be the aberration. And what we've seen the last 3 or 4 years is what Filip Hronek actually is. Which if he reverts back to that, oh my God, Vancouver, what are you doing? But even if he holds up what he's doing this year, it's still really good value.
Yep.
Which leads to the bigger conversation, which is kind of the black cloud hanging over this trade, unfortunately. What does this mean for the timeline of what the Red Wings are planning?
I want to get to that in a second. First of all, Evan, your reaction to the trade.
I know we've talked about Hronek being traded in previous trade deadline preview episodes from years past, but this was not the year I thought it was going to happen. And when it kind of came out of left field, I was, sad the Red Wings are getting rid of Hronek, because I think, he's been on the team obviously since he was drafted, and like he's been a stable, mostly stable, half a point per game producing defenseman. Like he's been a strong member of this team. But when I saw the return, I was like, Filip, I love you. I love you in more ways than one.
But it's hard to say bye to those handlebars, but that's one way to peel them away.
There's no sheriff in town anymore, so it's up to everybody else to step up. But man, what happens with this, with the Islanders' first round pick this year is extremely interesting.
I will say, I had the same reaction, of course. Like I said, I was surprised. But once you thought about it, like the surprise was that it happened, but it did add up. I generally agree. I think this was the kind of value where it doesn't matter whether or not you think Hronek is sustainable at this level, or if you think it's a flash in the pan, or somewhere between, because that's probably the most likely outcome. This value is good to great no matter what. The worst case is that this is really good value in my mind.
Yeah.
So for me, knowing that Hronek has been shopped in the past, at least once, multiple occasions, based on my understanding, seeing this kind of price, I bet, and this is just an inference, this is just a guess, it's not working off any information here, but I bet Yzerman saw that price, saw that he can get it, probably coupled it with, the context of this team isn't going to do anything this year in terms of the playoffs, coupled it with, as much as it's not really the most fair to say, because post-Reeves hit, and then more importantly being paired with Chiarot, Hronek's not really been that great in 2023 compared to the start of the year. He said, I can't pass up this price.
We say it all the time that every player's got their price, and I absolutely believe that when Steve Yzerman saw this, he's like,
yep. How
could I say no?
Brad, what did you say to me coming in my front door before your shoes were even off? What does a good GM do?
Call the bad GMs a lot.
What Vancouver is doing is a mystery. The world's great Sherlock Holmes and all the world's greatest detectives could get involved. They'll never solve it.
I appreciate them so much as a hockey fan. Remove the Red Wings context from this. I appreciate them so much as a hockey fan because they keep the headlines hot. I don't get this from Vancouver's perspective. Hronek's a good player. He's going to make their blue line better. But that first round pick, either 2023 or 2024, is extremely valuable. If that pick is in 2023, if it's pick 15 in 2023, that, like, we haven't talked about it because the Red Wings have kind of changed everyone's plans at this point of the year, but this is a really, really, really strong first round. You could get a centerman at pick 15. Maybe not the top end ones, but you could walk away with one. It's so valuable. In 2014, with the way the Islanders are projected, who knows? They could be a lottery team. That could be Celebrini next year. You're right, Evan. There aren't enough detectives in the world to unravel that one.
This pick, to me, watching the Islanders now is going to be on the radar, which I don't think those words have ever left my mouth.
Hey, that Red Wings Islanders game, if that was being played now as opposed to the other day, there'd be a lot more people tuning in.
Yeah.
So Red Wings fans, you really, really got to root for the Islanders to lose.
But not just a little bit.
Yeah.
Not too much.
Yeah, that's right. You're right, Brad. It is now time to talk bigger picture, because this is, honestly, there could have been a much smaller deal and the same kind of signal would have been sent that, the Red Wings are selling, or at least to some degree, they're changing things a lot. Even if you are the most anti, selling position in terms of what to do, what Steve Yzerman should do this trade deadline, no matter what, things are going to change presumably quite a bit here. Hronek creates more questions as to what's going to happen on defense. There was a hot second there where we thought, is this Jakob Chychrun? Well, Jakob Chychrun, who is a left defenseman but can play the right side, was traded to Ottawa, funny enough, so talk about some hockey poetry there, for a 2023 conditional first, which is top 5 protected from Ottawa, and a 2024 second-round pick from Washington that's conditional, that goes into a first-round pick That's top 10 protected in 2024. And that only happens if Ottawa makes this year's Eastern Conference Finals.
Likely.
So it's a first and 2 seconds.
Yeah. And then another a 2026 second round pick. You compare that is on balance just one additional second round pick than Detroit got for Filip Hronek. To me, that's for how long Jakob Chychrun has been out and what they've been asking for and how much better. I'm sorry, he's a better player than Hronek. That's a way more valuable asset, and Hronek's very valuable. Yzerman knocked it out of the park, and Arizona flubbed this one in my mind. Ottawa got a steal. I'm almost mad Detroit didn't do it.
I am mad Detroit didn't do it. I'm assuming, Ottawa or Arizona might have not given certain teams last right of refusal or something like that. I don't know.
I'm sure 30 other teams are mad it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Legit, every team that didn't make that trade screwed up.
Yeah.
But either way, we made that trade. Just we gave up Hronek.
Yeah.
We did it in reverse.
Detroit is it's hard to be mad when they got nearly an identity. Not that a second round pick is a small difference, but I think Chychrun is more than a second round pick, more valuable of an asset than Hronek. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it wasn't Chychrun, and so there's still a lot of. We're going to get into what might be happening next for Detroit, but what does this mean for this trade deadline? What does this mean for the rebuild? What does this mean for the future? Broad strokes.
Well, before everything I say gets disqualified by whatever the hell Steve Yzerman does in the next 12 hours, I think this is the signal that this is the core of this team is definitively the Mo Seider, Lucas Raymond age bracket. Larkin you keep around, and I alluded to this talking about it. You need veteran leadership. Your whole team can't be 23, 24, 25 years old when you're in your window. I think what Yzerman is seeing is kind of twofold. He sees the strength of the Atlantic Division right now. He understands that in the next 3 years, the Red Wings aren't going to be among the big dogs in this division. Even if they are squeaking into some wildcard playoff spots, they are not competing for cups in this window.
That's diplomatic. For the Atlantic in the East is a Thunderdome. What the hell is happening?
Yes. Montreal is the only bad team in this division, truly. And I think what he's looking for, and this is probably the right course of action, I know I'm guilty of talking about players' windows, Bertuzzi, Larkin, Hronek, and then really isolating it. If the Red Wings are going to compete for cups in quote-unquote Hronek's window, how big could that window be? If they're not competing for another 3-4 years, that's Hronek's 28, 29, 30 years. That's a small window, relatively speaking. What I think Yzerman's vision probably is and should be is the Washington, the Pittsburgh, the Chicago. Our window is 5, 6, 7, 8 years long because we built it around our young core, and then we added pieces around that young core as they came and progressed through their early to mid-20s and then started creeping up on 30. You can do that with Seider, Raymond, Edvinsson, Kasper, Kosa. That's the core. Now, obviously, it's a big if because you need these guys to hit. We know Seider, Raymond, pretty safe bets at this point, I would say.
Yeah.
Edvinsson progressing well. Kosa's been on a heater lately. Kasper's having a phenomenal SHL season. So it's a calculated bet that this is the group that's going to take you to where you want to be. The Red Wings now have, from the looks, again, understanding the condition on the Islanders pick, but right now, 5 picks in the top 43 picks of this draft. 5. If they decide to hold these picks and not flip them for, hypothetically, now that Chychrun's off the market, like a Nick Schmaltz, you are going to hit on a few of those. That's just the odds. You're getting 2 to 3 really good players out of that group in all likelihood that now join that rough age bracket of Kasper, Kosa, Edvinsson, Seider, Raymond.
Yeah.
Does this mean more patience is required? Unfortunately, yes. Does it mean the Red Wings are going to be bad this next year? No, I think they'll probably be very similar to this year. But Hronek was having a huge year, and not having Hronek there for the rest of this season and next year, it can't be understated. Your team's not better. And that is before we know what happens with Tyler Bertuzzi, Sundqvist, Zadina, Vrana. This team's not going to be better for the rest of this season, and depending what they do in the offseason, they might not be better than what they were this season next year, unfortunately.
I want to recognize here, we've been all aboard what the Red Wings have been doing leading up to the wild card race, with full acknowledgement of the fact that the East and the Atlantic specifically was becoming a Thunderdome, the Metro too, knowing that it was going to lead to probably not a lot in the playoffs, but we were espousing the virtues of just getting into the playoffs. And I stand by all of that. If you're thinking, how does 2 games change things? I mean, they couldn't have been 2 worse games to lose in terms of who you're losing to in the standings, and the nature, the statements that were made and how they lost changed things a lot.
And it's worth noting the teams around them
won while all that was happening.
Yeah.
So you have to take like Evan says, you have to just kind of ride the waves as they come, as usual. Evan's right. But I still stand by all of that. But I don't see how you can walk away from the Ottawa games and seeing how the rest of the East is loading up and not at least agree with what I think is the 2 paths that Yzerman is taking here, and both are resets. One is a heavy reset. You sell, knowing that it's going to be a while yet because you have to wait out. The thing I mentioned last episode is, yes, these teams are loading up, but they're not going to be able to keep these guys forever. They're going to have to pay up eventually, and that's when these guys leave in free agency. They get traded to make cap space, etc. This is why the cap is a good thing in my mind. Anyhow, or the other option is a lighter reset. Think about what St. Louis has in front of them, where they are going to try to restructure around Thomas and Kyrou and use their first round picks to do it quickly. I used to think the quick turnaround wasn't a thing. You do need a lot of luck. You need a lot of fantastic scouting. You need a lot of good outcomes in the draft lottery to go your way. But it's possible. Those are the 2 options in my mind, and I don't see how you can walk away from Monday and Tuesday's games and not think that those are the really only 2 reasonable options for Steve Yzerman. It would be unreasonable to not at least explore or push towards trading and maximizing to not try to compete with the absolute gladiators in the East right now.
And it's probably worth mentioning that of those 2 options, it's probably reasonable to say Yzerman's not locked in on either one of them right now. Everything's fluid. You get flexibility to be flexible. You have what Yzerman's going to have here after this draft, assuming he doesn't trade any draft picks, which is possible, but assuming he doesn't trade any of these 5 picks this year, is he's going to have 5 more very high quality prospects in the hopper. There's not enough roster spots in the Red Wings for all of them. That's just the reality. You look at the Red Wings, according to Scott Wheeler, the 3rd best prospect pool in the entire NHL, and now you're adding 5 top 45 picks to it. You're getting quality players. Now, further to your point of the 2 paths, you go slower, you let these guys develop, and all of a sudden all your best prospects just make up your core for the foreseeable future, and you run with that. Or if the Red Wings progress in the next year or 2, Kasper and Edvinsson come in next year and they hit, and they look good, and the Red Wings are winning games. Kubelik's still producing, Perron still producing, Larkin's Larkin, Raymond's Raymond, Seider. You have the world of picks and prospects to trade for a Nick Schmaltz, for a whoever is the top defenseman on the market that year. You have the ability to hit the gas the second you want to hit the gas. And if those opportunities don't present themselves, well, okay, now you've got this fantastic group of late teen, early 20 players who you can ride for the next 10 years if you want to. And, I jokingly said this before we started recording and alluded to it while we're recording about how I'm mad the Red Wings didn't make the Chychrun trade. It's funny to think, if you just look at it plainly, a 1st and 2 seconds, the Red Wings could have given up that in just this year's draft and still had a 1st and 2nd round pick. So if we're talking about flexibility future to be able to hit the gas when they want to hit the gas, they're always going to have that option because they already have those assets. This isn't even talking about Berggren, Soderblom, Hannes, pick, Buchelnikov, the million prospects they have that not only have value to the future of this Red Wings, they have value as trade assets if and when the Red Wings get to that point. Look at what Ottawa's done. Critique Ottawa all you want. They went and acquired the best forward on the market last year in Alex DeBrincat. They went and acquired the best defenseman on the market this year in Jakob Chychrun. They still have a loaded prospect tool, a young, talented team. And yeah, not many picks left over, but they were able to do it because they stockpiled all of this. And they decided now was the time to really, truly hit the gas. Again, you can debate whether or not they should have. I don't care. They're the Senators. Who cares? But the Red Wings now have that option in front of them because, oh my God, are they not loaded right now for picks and prospects?
You're right. It's all wide open. I think if you ask Steve Yzerman right now and he would give you the time of day, what's your plan? He'd say, get good players, make this team better. And it would be an honest answer from Steve Yzerman. I know you can't take his word, literally. You have to understand that he's not always going to reveal that. He himself says, don't take anything I say seriously. But yeah, you're right, Brad. The only path forward here is to be flexible and make the best deals and make the best moves that come up to you and leave your options open. The Walman signing leaves your options open. The Hronek trade creates way more avenues and options than you would have had by keeping Hronek in terms of when are you going to be competitive and when can you and what else can you bring in to retool for further down the line. This next day and a half, I don't think Yzerman has a specific vision in mind as to what's going to happen. So let's talk about what we think is going to happen based on what we know and what's out there. First of all, before the Ottawa game, before the Larkin signing, before the Hronek trade, before the Walman signing even, I believe, it was before the Walman signing, Tanner Jeannot was traded from Nashville to Tampa Bay. And you might be thinking, what does that have to do with the Detroit Red Wings? Tanner Jeannot, is a little bit of the I'll punch you in the face and score in the playoffs type player that Tyler Bertuzzi is, but Tyler Bertuzzi is better than Tanner Jeannot. So why does that matter? Here's what was given up for Tanner Jeannot by the Tampa Bay Lightning. Cal Foote, which is, that it's not really a young player that's going to go anywhere, I think, in an appreciable way, but a 2025 first round pick that's top 10 protected, a 2024 second round pick, a 2023 third round pick, a 2023 fourth round pick, and a 2023 fifth round pick.
What is this, the CHL?
This is like an NHL GM mode, create a team. This is what you do when you want to stay at the top of the league forever in your be a pro mode or your GM mode or whatever it is. A first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and a prospect for Tanner Jeannot. I like Tanner Jeannot. I think he's a good player. I think he's better than his results dictate this year, but his stat line this year is 5 goals, 9 assists in 56 games. He is a forward. He has produced less than Jake Walman on defense, who hasn't produced a lot. A first, second, third, fourth, and fifth for him. He's at $800,000, so that cap hit for Tampa Bay, who is going for it every single year, which is what you have to be doing when you have an elite core like they do. I have no problem with them targeting him and valuing him highly. But if that's the market rate for Tanner Jeannot, what can you get for Tyler Bertuzzi? It wasn't long after the whispers of Bertuzzi, we were hearing those again. Teams really heated it back up, and it's our understanding that, Yzerman, and this isn't exclusive to Yzerman, any GM who has anything to sell across the league saw that, their ears perked up, and all of a sudden are listening. Think back to what we said when Bertuzzi first came off the market, quote unquote. We said it accomplishes a couple of things. First of all, it's a good message to the room. It says we're going for it. Second of all, you're not committed to anything. Trade deadline's Friday, March 3rd. You can listen to offers and just not do anything up until then. It creates demand. It drives up the price. You wait for maybe better players to come off the market, so your player is a little bit more of a golden egg kind of thing.
That the timing of that statement is like a mastercraft in being a general manager in pro sports.
And I don't think that was a thing. Actually, I can say for sure, like that wasn't a thing where it's like, Yzerman fed that to people and put it out there. I think he told other GMs in a way because he knew it would get out. And I genuinely believe he had both avenues open. Like if the Red Wings won all of their games and we weren't having this conversation, then he would have been off the market. But Tyler Bertuzzi, I am back into expecting him to be dealt if this price can be had. The only way I can see him not being dealt is if the Red Wings sign him, which I still think is an option. But, let's say first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, you're doing that.
So Tanner Jeannot's cost controlled this year at a very low price, and then team control remains at the end of the season because he's a restricted free agent. So, and we've seen Tampa do this in previous years with Brandon Hagel, Barclay Goodrow. They value additional years and team control beyond just a rental, which Bertuzzi's at this point a pure rental, so it's probably worth keeping that in the back of your mind. But yes, Tyler Bertuzzi's a far superior player to Tanner Jeannot. And we've seen tons of first-round picks flying around this trade deadline so far. Teams are not afraid to move them. And I think teams are in their window are understanding that, yes, the first-round picks are valuable, but if we want to make a run this year, that prospect's not helping us for 2-3 years, especially late first-round picks. Teams are starting to realize the actual value of those and relative to their window, and they're moving them more freely, so there's opportunity there. You look at teams now that, Kane, Tarasenko, Niederreiter, Jeannot, keep going. The 97 other forwards who have been traded at this deadline, there's still a handful of teams out there who have not made a move that are definitely. Dallas has not made a significant move. Carolina has not made a significant move at forward. Calgary has not made a move yet. They're the only team in the NHL that hasn't made a trade yet. Edmonton might not be done. Tampa just cleared up cap space. Although I don't know what the hell Tampa would have left to give up for Bertuzzi. But the teams that want to make a big splash at forward, they're down to Bertuzzi, JVR, maybe Nick Schmaltz if Arizona's willing to give him up, even though he's got term. The market's thinning out. Teams don't want to be left on the outside looking in, and that could drive up Bertuzzi's value even for a rental. Maybe Dallas, if they want to get in, the cost might be Stankoven now, which a week ago I would have said was insane.
I have to say, too, like you said, Evan, like a masterstroke in timing, not even just when it was announced, like right now, things could not have gone better for Detroit in, Brad, your whole mantra for this episode, flexibility and options. We're recording, it's past 8 p.m. right now on Wednesday night. Between now and Friday, March 3rd at the trade deadline at 3 p.m. Eastern, that is a whole universe of moves away. So that is, that's quite a bit of time to make a move, to drive up price, a lot of phone calls. Like that is, a price can get driven up in mere hours, let alone a day and a half. Secondly, another thing that has gone to Yzerman and Detroit's advantage here is this is the most insane trade deadline I've ever seen in terms of the buildup. It started and it has not stopped in terms of the volume of trades and the massive impact of trades. I've not seen this many significant pieces move around ever, really, in the modern NHL. What does that mean? It means a lot of big names have come off the board. So folks have been making their moves early. So those who are going to be desperate and have assets to give up, they have a day and a half to just sit there and rack their brains and see if they want to meet Yzerman's price. Again, I don't want to remove the option from the table of keeping Bertuzzi. I know it might not make a lot of sense. I don't think it's necessarily the path forward if you consider, what we were talking about earlier with like the two kinds of resets, a heavy reset and a lighter one. I still think dealing Bertuzzi for a really good return is the way to do it. On the off chance the return's not there, there's still a chance they sign, but I would not be surprised if Yzerman's options here are a really strong return for Bertuzzi or an insane return for Bertuzzi just by holding out. Things are playing in his hand, in Detroit's hand, to make the most of a Tyler Bertuzzi situation, which 2 months ago I was sitting on this podcast whining, seems like it dissolved. And we're only talking about Bertuzzi. We have not yet talked about Zadina, Vrana, Sundqvist, other players who are probably also going to get calls and maybe be dealt.
Yeah, and let's not forget, too, the Red Wings have experience with a similar situation where the Tomas Tatar trade came down to the last minutes of the trade deadline, and then Vegas massively overpaid for him because otherwise they were left on the outside looking in. And that scenario could play out the exact same way here with Bertuzzi.
Your thoughts on, I know what the answer is going to be, but your thoughts on the most likely outcome and whether or not they should trade Bertuzzi as opposed to trying to sign and then.
I think the Red Wings, like you guys alluded to, they're in a great position now because the supply is low and the demand is still high. The West is wide open, and a team like Dallas would be crazy not to keep adding and really go for it because they know that the East is going to beat itself up by the time they get to the Stanley Cup Finals. So for the Red Wings, at the end of the day, they have the ultimate flexibility in this scenario. Like you said, hold out for the highest bid. And I do believe there's going to be teams that get nervous and will make an overbid. Whether that's for Bertuzzi or someone else, I don't know. Or they can just hold on to him and say, you know what, we'll go back to the bargaining table, see if we can't get a contract to work out. Like, the biggest thing in the Red Wings world right now is flexibility, and they've got it in spades in every single aspect in terms of asset management.
The only thing I will say to that, though, is I don't see how you keep Bertuzzi now after trading Hronek.
That's
Yeah, I know.
You know what I mean? Like, it's you're resetting the timeline. And again, I still agree with Ryan's point of there's two paths here, but both those paths lead younger.
and again, the talking about it and entertaining the possibilities to say it's not impossible, this could still happen. But when I think about potentially signing Bertuzzi, I don't think it could be long term if the money's low enough. I don't really understand why Bertuzzi would do that. So when I think about a potential Bertuzzi signing, I'm like, okay, short term, kind of like a souped up version of what Walman's doing, and it's a very tradable contract.
But with the market the way it is now, why would you risk kicking that can down the road?
Now is the time.
I agree. That's why personally I land on not only is it the most likely, it makes the most sense to deal him. And frankly, first of all, home run for Steve Yzerman to be able to flip someone unexpected into major assets when you recognize, okay, I am not competing in this East. This team cannot do, like, as good as it feels, like this is insane. So you turned one player into major assets. The best move possible here, the absolute best move possible here in terms of the actual value of the player and what you can get in this market is trading Tyler Bertuzzi. Sucks. He's a fan favorite. We love Tyler Bertuzzi, but the time is right. He somehow escaped injury at the trade deadline this time. Somehow most of the players ahead of him on the market have been traded. The prices have all been set high. This is a confluence of all of the events to trade Tyler Bertuzzi for a haul. So inevitably it's going to happen the moment we hit publish, and we know that. But yeah, I see this trending in that way where undoubtedly, like that's what the primary focus of what any of Yzerman's text or phone calls are like right now. In terms of likely destinations, I liked your points, Brad, in terms of teams who have to make a move: Carolina, Dallas, Calgary. I talked earlier, Pittsburgh really wanted Hronek last year. They were also really pushing for Bertuzzi. Same thing. They wanted to make a hockey trade. That doesn't make sense. You don't deal Tyler Bertuzzi for other players. You get him for high picks. If they have some first-round picks to play with, if they really want to capitalize on their big three over there, Crosby, Letang, and Malkin, and bring in Bertuzzi, maybe you can get a first-round pick off of them. There's a big market, relatively speaking, for who could use, every NHL team could use a Bertuzzi, who could use and who could give up enough for Tyler Bertuzzi.
I don't think Edmonton's done yet either.
I didn't think so either.
I really like the move they made for Ekholm,
yeah.
But I don't think they're done. And they have contracts they can move out in order to free up cap space for Bertuzzi. Again, not saying that's the definitive destination, but I think we have to include them in that scenario.
So in terms of a return, before we talk about the other players, ballpark, same as Hronek, a little less, a little more?
It's hard to predict because different positions, different values, different team control circumstances. Overall, I think Bertuzzi's the better player, but Hronek was having a better season. Bertuzzi's rental versus Hronek's team control. I'm going to say the return for Bertuzzi won't be as good as Hronek's, but I think it'll be the same in the margins. Could I see a first and a second round pick for Bertuzzi? Yeah, absolutely. But it won't be the Islanders first and the Canucks second. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It'll be a late 20s first and a mid to late second round pick, or a team like Edmonton who might have to get creative with contracts and they moved a first round pick already, so it might be more prospect themed. I don't know, Yamamoto and Broberg or something along those lines because they're moving out a contract. Detroit's taking a contract back. Edmonton doesn't have another first that they want to give up. I don't know where Broberg might not be the right prospect, but just something along those lines. You know what I mean? It could be something creative like that. Again, we keep looking at Dallas. Might be Stankoven straight up. Do you value that at more or less than what they got for Hronek? I'd say it's close, but less. So teams are going to have to get creative, because most of the teams that are going to be inquiring about Bertuzzi are capped out, which means if the Red Wings have to take back a contract that actually usually adds value to the trade, like, hey, yeah, we will take this bad contract off your hands as well, but we're getting that prospect we really like. So I think it's going to be a substantial return, but I think a lot of creativity is going to be required.
Other players in the market, Filip Zadina's name pops up once again. That is not a new occurrence. It kind of happens it's happened at least once, if not twice in the past. I know last year, trying to find a new home to sell Filip Zadina as not just a reclamation project, but someone who is already trending upwards. Much like Filip Hronek this year, I think this would be the best time if you are going to deal Filip Zadina to do that. He's played well since coming back from injury. That said, it's in a much more muted way. It's not going to be you're not talking first round picks in exchange for Zadina, but that's not a new sentiment. The team wanting to move on from Zadina and seeing what they could flip him. I could see that turning into a trade of project for project.
That Zadina just screams Carolina, right?
Yeah.
They not only do they love their cheap players with team control, they love their reclamation projects, and they're just going to build the 2018 draft at this point.
Honestly, it's kind of funny. You can always project which player is like, yeah, they need a new scenery, and man, Raleigh is really great around this time of year. It always ends up being Carolina. Any player who Ken Holland has familiarity with, you can usually, like, you're right. I think he's very familiar with Bertuzzi and is interested. I wouldn't be surprised if he's wondering about Zadina too. That one to me is I could go either way on whether or not the team should deal him. I would like to see him get some run based on how he's been playing, but at the same time, you can't, with all the forwards coming up, and think back to what Brad said earlier this episode of the Red Wings have so many prospects who are going to need roster spots if they make it. You got to make room eventually. With other players who are on the board, so Vrana, whether folks want to accept it or not, his name is very much out there. He's a really difficult one to pin down in terms of value. I think he's as likely, if not more likely, to be moved than Bertuzzi.
I wouldn't say more likely.
No, you're right. That was silly. As likely to be moved. He's in the same tier as Bertuzzi. Let's call it that.
The Red Wings are motivated to make the trade.
So I don't know necessarily that they're so concerned about clearing up the cap space for next year now that Hronek is off the book. But if they make other moves, and someone, I think Frank Saravalli mentioned Parayko today, like wonders about that, or let's say they want to go for someone with a big contract, then they still will be cognizant of cap space. But the organizational focus is to not have to pay Jakub Vrana his $5.25 million next year. So to me, that's a harder value to pin down in terms of what they can get in return. Detroit might have to add. It might just be a low value, but he's another name that's out there.
Yeah, it frees up a roster spot. It gives him a fresh start. I'd be shocked if they trade him, and if they get a return, it's anything more than a mid-round pick. I mean, he was on waivers. Now, if Detroit's willing to retain half, that's a different conversation, because there are teams who would be interested in, taking the approach of, but we can fix him. Yeah, and teams love doing that. I just mentioned Carolina. Like, if they're interested in Zadina, which wouldn't surprise me, they'd probably be at the door for Vrana too. And they're also the team that signed Tony DeAngelo, so they can work with off ice issues.
Yep.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility. I don't think Vrana is a impact trade. I think that's we need to be done with this storyline type of trade.
And I honestly think if you're talking about, you've dealt Filip Hronek, you could end it there. But the whole list is, if you've dealt Filip Hronek, Bertuzzi's name is out there, Zadina and Vrana, there aren't many players off the board here. I would not be surprised if teams wanting to make a depth move ask about Sundqvist. I would not be surprised if teams wanting to make a depth move ask about guys like Suter or Kubalik. I could see a world maybe where if you want to get completely crazy, someone says, like, I want to give you a late round pick for Osterley just because I need a body at defense, or what's Ned doing right now? Will you retain on Ned? We just need insurance at goaltending, at goalie, whatever it might be. I think everyone's on the board. And you know what, as weird as it is to say, I also think that includes, the free agents who came in, barring Sherratt and Kopp. I think folks will call about Perron. Everything is on the table here for Detroit.
I think Yzerman would be motivated to move Sherrod at this point, but nobody's touching that contract.
You say that, but he was traded for a first and he was signed with some competition for his rights. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't think this is the year if you're going to move on from that contract where it's most likely to happen. Any of those names that come to mind where you're like, yeah, I absolutely see this guy moving?
I think Sundqvist will have a lot of calls. Teams love that type as a bottom six forward, and he was one of those bottom six forwards on a cup winner. So he's proven he can play that role for exactly what the teams are hoping to get out of it.
He's kind of like Nemesnikov in that respect. Like Nemesnikov was always playing like a player where you're like, yeah, that's a guy who's going to get dealt at the deadline.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that Sundqvist is absolutely going to get dealt at the deadline, but he makes 2.75 if Detroit retains on that.
Strikes me like that, like a bottom six Tampa guy.
Oh yeah,
who would just pop off in the playoffs.
Detroit doesn't have any retention on their books right now, do they?
Detroit has Richard Panik for the rest of this year, so they can do two more for the rest of this year, and then Panik for sure comes off the books next year.
So they have all three slots available for next year as well. Yeah. So
you can retain salary on 3 contracts at a time.
Yeah. So they've got, if they wanted to retain on, let's say, Bertuzzi and Sundqvist, they could do that. And if they wanted to retain on a Perron, Kubalik, Vrana, they have the slots next year to do it as well.
So we talked about, the names that are out there based on what's reasonable and also what we've heard and what's been reported elsewhere. I think we all agree Bertuzzi, most likely with Vrana to be dealt, but in terms of big trade, Bertuzzi's the one to keep your eyes on. Really, everyone's on the table. I think we all kind of understand that now. We talked about the options, what might happen, what Yzerman's paths forward are here. And the fact that it's fluid and it can go in any direction is, that's a fact. But what would you do here? Based on the market right now, based on how the other teams in the East are loading up, based on all of that, what is your path forward if you're Steve Yzerman? Which kind of fork in the road do you choose?
Everybody's got a price.
You're saying sell.
Sell. You don't trade Filip Hronek because you're invested in making a run this year at this point. That sends a huge message to the room. They know they're out of it this year. And they could still rattle off a bunch of wins. I'm not sitting here and saying,
oh, that's what they're going to do, right? They're actually...
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that the team's dead in the water, but management is. You do not trade Filip Hronek with the playoff run being at the forefront of your priorities. And you can't, it would be a disservice to the organization to half-ass it either way. You either maximize value on your pending UFAs or you make a run at the playoffs. You traded Filip Hronek. The signal is in the air. So I'm not saying you sell everything for whatever price, because again, there's value to guys, and there's value to not setting the bar too low for your guys. You're listening on Bertuzzi. You're probably actively shopping Bertuzzi. You're actively shopping Vrana. You're listening on Sundqvist. You're listening on Suter. You're listening on, I'd be less inclined to move the guys for next year that are under contract for next year as well, because you need bodies and you don't want to take too big of a step backwards, if a step backwards at all. But it would be a disservice to not listen.
Does anyone? I'll give my answer in a second here, but does anyone call about Robbie Fabry with 2 years after this one at $4 million? Is that too much term for folks to consider? His knee injury history, would that scare them away? I wonder, because he's been productive.
It depends on the team. I think that comes down to any given team's pro scouts. Again, you look at a team like Carolina who hates rentals and loves acquiring guys with term. Sure, I use Carolina as the example a lot, but they're not the only team that is like that. Again, everybody's going to listen, but you need bodies for next year. So I wouldn't be pressed to shop players like that around. I would not. I would listen, because as we found out with Hronek, everybody's got a price, and if someone meets that price, you do it. But there is a limit to how many guys you can do that on before you just set this team right into another full-fledged rebuild.
Yeah, my path that I choose here to answer the question is you absolutely deal Bertuzzi, because I don't see, you can't go past the deadline without a Bertuzzi contract. And this opinion is nullified if one comes up in the next 36 hours or whatever. I don't foresee that happening. So I think you absolutely deal Bertuzzi. I think you deal Vrana as long as you're not giving up, retain salary, whatever.
Yeah.
Don't give up assets really to do it or anything appreciable. And then from there, everyone from Zadina to Suter to Perron to Kubalik to whoever, set your standard of, this is my price where I say good trade.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to be set at great, doesn't have to be set at steal, it doesn't have to be the Hronek return, but set your price at good trade, and then the moment someone meets that, you do it. But if they don't, then you don't. Because you know what? I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing if this team takes a step back to then move forward. We have to be patient for a couple more years, whatever. But I think if they can avoid that, that would be better for the team. You don't need to break it all the way down to be good again, but you don't avoid really good value. So I think the must sells are Bertuzzi and Vrana, just based on Vrana's situation. And then anything else, you don't pull the trigger unless it kind of meets that standard.
Yeah, I think really it's a one step backwards, two step forward type mentality. You're selling off the assets that you can for good value, because you look at your division and you realize everybody else is a juggernaut and now is not the time. So it's realizing that the timeline needs to be delayed slightly, because what is the point in being part of the brawl that is the Atlantic Division right now?
We could sit here and talk for 2 more hours about the Red Wings trade possibilities. We actually made the world's best audible, like the podcast's best audible call in history. Last weekend, we were planning on doing the trade deadline primer on Sunday, but we said, you got to wait until after Ottawa, so we're going to do it on Wednesday. And oh my God, we're happy we did that.
It's not even a primer. It's a trade deadline review part 1.
Yeah, we're just right in the thick of it now. But we have another episode coming post trade deadline. Like that Friday night is what's planned. So for the sake of not having too much content expire in just 2 days here.
Oh, don't worry. Everything we said will be rendered completely irrelevant in the next 48 to 72 hours, just like happened last episode.
48 to 72 minutes. Let's be real. Starting with that, we're going to rapid fire through some trades that have happened across the NHL. Anything that we don't cover or cover in depth will be covered in the trade deadline recap, so fret not. But we talked a lot about Timo Meier being traded to the Devils. The trade finally went through as we were editing. It's a mess. That
trade literally feels like it happened 2 weeks ago.
100%. Yeah, it feels insane. The Sharks got a 2023 conditional first. That's a top 2 protected. A 2024 second, a 2024 seventh. Shakir Mukhamadullin, who is an interesting prospect. Fabian Zetterlund, who's an interesting young player. Andreas Johansson, Nikita Okotluk for Meier, and a bunch of guys in the 5th. Essentially, San Jose accepted a lot of pieces very quickly. My opinion on that one, not a bad return for San Jose. There was no whopper there. There's no like grand slam player, and I think for one of the best, if not the best player at the trade deadline, I'm kind of underwhelmed by San Jose's return in my mind.
Yeah, history has taught us that when a team's return for a premium player is volume, it rarely works out. Not never, but rarely works out, because the New Jersey first-round pick is going to be a late first-round pick. Mukhamadullin is a good prospect, probably a middle-pairing defenseman. So Zetterlund, I know, has his fans, and Okotluk also has his fans. So there's potential in those two guys, but they're far from sure bets. So yeah, if they hit on the first-round pick and Mukhamadullin turns into something, realistically, you're walking away with a middle 6 forward with the first-round pick and a middle-pair defenseman for one of the best offensive producers at 5-5 in the NHL. That's if I'm a San Jose fan, I'm not happy right now.
We talked about the Tampa acquisition of Tanner Jeannot. In my mind, overpay. But if you're going for it every year and you know the likelihood of those picks turning into players, I can see the justification. I think with that, it's understandable, but still an overpay in my mind. Toronto very quickly acquired Jake McCabe, Sam Lafferty. They also, who else? They traded up here Engvall. They brought Luke Shen back. They made a ton of moves here. That's an interesting team. They have 100 defensemen now, all of them viable.
Well, Rasmus Sandin to Wash.
Yeah, Rasmus Sandin to Washington is the one that I missed there. Eric Gustafsson they brought in. Eric Gustafsson in a first was the return. They've not made moves with the East kind of loading up. They've not lacked in making their own moves. I think it's interesting with where they've done it. You see the kind of fallout from bringing in all of those defensemen and the moves they've had to make otherwise. I can't say I hate what they've done this trade deadline.
No, I like what they've done. They are a team that identified their needs and aggressively solved them. They solved the third line center issue with Ryan O'Reilly. They solved the fourth line issue by bringing in Lafferty. They saw they lacked a lot of actual defensive ability on defense, so they brought in Luke Shen and Jake McCabe, who is under team control for a couple more years with salary retained, so that Jake McCabe piece was a tidy piece of business. Worth noting, the Leafs have not made the playoffs since they had another McCabe on the blue line, so they're trying to get that juju going there.
He is Toronto was the only team not on his no trade list. He had the only Canadian team not on his no trade list.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
dude wants his money. He hates that income tax.
Yeah. So it was a tidy piece of work by Kyle Dubas. So if it doesn't happen for the Leafs this year, it is going to be very hard to fault Dubas for it.
There was a lot else that happened. Puljujarvi went to Carolina, as we mentioned.
They love their reclamation projects.
Yeah, just scrolling through here. Matthias Ekholm from Nashville to Edmonton, 4% retained because he has term left in a 6th-round pick in exchange for Tyson Barrie going back the other way. Reed Schaefer, a 2023 first and a 2024 fourth. Good on Ken Holland.
That's a really good deal. Again, we've talked about the actual value of a late first-round pick relative to what people think that value is, and Ken Holland maximized here. Didn't give up anything premium. The $250,000 retained just seems like the biggest waste of time I've ever seen. Like, is Nashville? That is one of their 3 retention spots for the next 3 or 4. Why?
I bet Edmonton has other designs in mind, and they said,
well, for Edmonton, it's fine. Who cares? They get salary retained. Nashville's wasting $250,000 on one of their retention slots. But either way, I really like the move for Edmonton. Ekholm is exactly what they needed on that blue line, and they did not have to give up a king's ransom to get it.
Gustav Nyquist, half retained for a 5th from Columbus. Just mentioning him because he's of interest to Red Wings fans. The Patrick Kane move finally happened. The Rangers got Patrick Kane. The Arizona Coyotes played partner in there to help make it happen. They got a conditional 2025 3rd-round pick. Vili Saarijarvi, his name's come up a lot recently, was involved in that trade. A 2023 conditional 2nd that upgrades to a 1st, potentially, and a 2025 4th for that Kane move. Late last night, Jonathan Quick, who thought he was retiring in beautiful Los Angeles, California, was traded, and he wasn't happy about it, to the Columbus Blue Jackets. LA acquired Jonas Carpasalo and Vlad Gavrikov. That trade finally moved for Jonathan Quick, a 2023 first that's conditional based on whether or not the LA makes the playoffs, and a 2024 third. So LA is shoring up their goaltending. Lars Eller got traded. Obviously, there was a Hronek deal. Shane Gostisbehere got traded in the midst of trying to cover the Hronek deal for a 2026 3rd-round pick. The Chychrun deal we talked about. We talked about the rights to Eric Portillo a while back. Well, that got traded to LA as well. So, again, they're shoring up their goaltending. Teddy Bluger to Vegas, Nemesnikov to San Jose, and Michael Granlund for a 2nd from Nashville to Pittsburgh. So quite a bit has happened. You would think that this is Friday afternoon. I can't believe there's still a day and a half left before this deadline is over.
What else can, other than what we've talked about, what else can possibly happen that would top this?
All I can say is whatever is going to happen, it's guaranteed to happen at about 10:30 p.m. tonight when this episode posts. So if you think, wow, it's been quiet a couple hours, it's because we've been recording. But hey, that's a joke. I am not going to complain. This is the most newsy episode we have had in the history of this show. Any bad timing has been undone just by all of this happening before we record. With that is the main show. We are going to move to overtime now, which is brought to you again by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. Again, the overtime bonus episodes, which record right after these, the Winged Wheel Podcast Discord, the giveaways, including oftentimes tickets to Detroit Red Wings home games. There's a lot of benefits, and it really is what helps support the show. So do subscribe if you're willing to support. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. We don't know how much of this is going to be viable long term, so we might not answer as many questions today. The next couple episodes are going to be a little crazy, but we are going to take some. Paul Breda says, I believe Stevie traded Filip after witnessing back-to-back poor games in crunch time scenario, sold high based on season to date. Who else did he see get exposed in Ottawa that may be next?
Everyone.
Wow.
The Detroit Red Wings.
I don't disagree. I don't think those two games helped Hronek, but I don't think Steve Yzerman said, okay, now I'm going to go deal Hronek.
I don't think it was a knee-jerk reaction when you see it. When you see the value come across the table that Vancouver was willing to part with, kind of makes it a no-brainer.
And you kind of have to have that thought in your mind for a while. There is a chance that Vancouver calls with an insane offer and it's brand new, and you're like, well, I have an hour to think about this, and you just kind of have to do it when that opportunity arises. But I agree in that the Ottawa games had an impact. I don't know necessarily that that was like a last straw for Hronek. I think what you're dead on is selling high.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I don't think we mentioned it. It was possible Hronek was injured in that second game. So
we talked about that off air.
He might not have been relevant to a playoff run at this point, depending on the severity.
Yeah. And then a question here also from Hockeytown Racing Academy. Part of what they mentioned was being disappointed that after all of this, we could have gotten Chychrun for a Diet Mountain Dew. Do you think the only reason Yzerman dealt Hronek was because of what Vancouver offered in return? I think that's a big part of it. Like that trigger. I was talking to someone else today, and they were asking about the why behind it, and I said big part of it just has to be the trigger price. There's a version of the Red Wings who think that this year was an aberration, or at least the peak of what we'll see from Filip Hronek, but they still don't sell, for just a second round pick. But someone offers this, and you kind of have to do it. Some other questions here, and they're a little funny because a lot of them came in after the Ottawa game, but before the signing and the trade. Joseph Barry has an interesting one. Do you think we are going to see Simon Edvinsson at any point this season?
There's a spot now.
Yeah, there's a chance. I mean, not on the Edvinsson plays on the left, but Chiarot can move over. There's a way to make that work. Quite possibly, depending on what happens over the next couple of days. I think it's more of a chance now than maybe there was a day ago.
At least to get him a feel for what the next level is.
Clint Benesh says, last week you referenced that the East is a Thunderdome. With that being the case, would that produce a higher level of compete for those when they are heading towards the final? Also, after these last 2 days, can we please trade everyone who won't be re-signed next season? I'm glad that I was busy these last 2 nights and not be able to watch the games. Clint, off to a good start.
Yes and no. Obviously, the East has a way tougher path to get to the Cup Finals, but that also means they're going to be way more exhausted and banged up when they get to the Cup Finals, which gives the West an advantage.
Adam Lang says, we got dummied, much like what I assume happens to Evan when he plays League. Who do you mean, buddy?
Oh, God. No one, because I'm trash.
Also from the Winged Wheel podcast night earlier this season against the Wild, I believe a video is being recorded. Are there any plans to turn this into a montage of sorts from that evening? Yes, our good friend and content producer Andy Molson put together a phenomenal video, and we will be releasing that soon. Once all the hubbub of trade deadline dies down, it'll probably be a good time to do that. Robert Wood, and again, credit to Robert, this was submitted 12 hours ago, so things have changed. Says, what are the chances we still add this week? And what are the main differences between adding now and adding in the offseason? So I want to use this to address one thing that we didn't really talk about, which is the Red Wings aren't necessarily only bringing in picks. They could bring in players here. We talked about Chychrun. It could still be someone like Parayko. Let's go complete crazy, and I have no information. Like, this isn't coming from anything, but what if they try to snatch one of Thomas or Kyrou from St. Louis? What are the chances of that happens still, that Yzerman uses these assets to try to flip it into something a little bit more immediate?
It's possible. I don't know what the appetite is given recent events and given the prices being paid for these players right now. I almost tend to lean to, if Yzerman wants to, he should, but in the off season when maybe everything's a little more reasonable. But like I said, you have 1 billion prospects and 1 billion picks. They can acquire almost whoever they want to acquire if they're willing to pay the price.
Joe Falzone says, man, forget the deadline. How do you even handle this offseason? You signed Larkin, which happened, and what else? Seider, Raymond, Rasmussen, and Berggren are all up for new contracts the following offseason, which really leaves room for only one additional top-end player, another mushy middle year. I don't think they were restricted to just those options. I think that this next day and a half, which, again, credit to Joe, this was almost 24 hours ago he posted, a lot is going to change in Detroit's cap structure between now and then, I feel. Yeah, you have to, I think whatever happens now, you have to kind of solidify that in the offseason or at least make a concerted move. If your reset is heavy and you're moving this timeline back, multiple years, then you have to do that in a serious way by adjusting your cap to anticipate that. Seider and Raymond's contracts are the main keys there. Like, you need to get them in for team favorable deals to give yourself that flexibility over the next period of time. Honestly, sign them for as long as possible.
8 years for both, please.
Plain and simple.
Yep.
I don't think I think next year's going to be a mushy middle year, but not because they're going to be. I just don't see another outcome after having to sell this deadline.
I feel like it's going to be a very similar offseason to this past year. Find your value signings that are actually good players. Don't go nuts unless you are getting a superstar, because that's what they need. I think the trade market might be explored a little more this offseason for all the reasons we already laid out. But yeah, I think it'll be a similar approach. Improve, but don't go so crazy to the point where you start making more Ben Sherratt mistakes.
All right. Ariel Rojo, how are you guys doing? Anything fun or relaxing planned for this weekend? Yeah, whatever happens after we record on Friday.
Saturday, I'm just going to lay on the floor in my bathroom in the fetal position for 12 straight hours. Thanks for asking.
Okay. There are plenty of comments here, and just because of the weird nature of the timing of this episode, and unfortunately for the commenters, a lot happened after they had submitted. We're going to wrap up there in the interest of time. We'd like to thank all of you for listening. For all of you who support the show through Patreon, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Thank you. If you don't or can't, that's still okay. Obviously, just you tuning in means the world to us. If you're a new listener, welcome. If you're a listener of old, thank you for tuning in. I hope this was a fun one for you. If another way you can support the show, leave us a rating. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your show. Subscribe. We're on YouTube as well. That all helps quite a bit. We'd like to thank all of our name-level sponsors on Patreon. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Bertuzzi's Missing Tooth, Nick Perks, Icon, Terry Driver of the number 69, Ryan Hanna's been in a Slam and Jamathon, Glenn Brabham, Aiden White, Keenan O'Donohue, Johnny Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Croner's Left Knee, Babe Landeskog, Carl Bertanen, Nanoluski, Chimmy, Chris P., Citizen High Five, Coyote Season Tickets in Tempe, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstim, Detroit Rob, DJ Denton, Evan Lobbyodler, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Joel Miranda, Joseph Berry, Kalen Wood, Kevin James, King Tone, Las Ensaladas Picantes, Marcus, Massive Wong, Evan Longsaber, Matt McKay, Matt Penzine, who's a brand new name-level sponsor. Welcome to the Dub Club, Matt. Michael Edlund, Nedeljkovic, goalie number 1, Nicholas Fritz, R.A., Scott Martin, Send It Seawolf. That's what I appreciate about you. Why do you always do this to me, Brad? General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, number 1 Detroit Red Guys fan, Aaron, Adam Rose, Antonio Gracias, Ben Barron, noted Filip Zadina whisperer and proud member of the Jake Walman Gritty Club, Brad Simmons, Brian Vasha, CJ Wilkinson, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Philip Zadiz Nuts, George's biggest fan, Grand Rapids hockey guy, Griffey Boy, James Laporte, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, John Evans, John Ingalls, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Lieutenant Matt S. of the Cheesebag Army, Linda Hull, Maximilian, Melissa Erickson, Ophelia, Reed, Steven, Tatar Sauce, The Hodag, the original Bertuzzi's Lost Tooth, and finally my favorite patron ever, Matt Keeler. Thank you all so much. I can't wait to see what breaking news comes out right after we post this. Enjoy the next couple days, folks. We'll talk to you after the trade deadline.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockey Town Evan.